Building a company with the potential to dominate the global market is a complex and hard thing to do. Top entrepreneurs who have built dominating products, raised millions of venture capital, and got millions of users will give you insider tips and tricks how they have succeeded and where they have failed. You will learn from investors, founders, and industry experts as well.
Hello, and that's the part where I take over. And yes, now it's time for our late night founders talks. That makes me want to have a drink or two. But then again, it's always a question of perspective. Where on this little blue ball we're at. Right now, I'm based in Vienna. It's 8:30 in the evening, and the light is going down slightly. So it's time to turn up the conversation a little. That was cheesy. Anyhow, let's cut to the chase, and let's get our first serial entrepreneur to join our stage. Yeah, boys and girls, usually when this gentleman takes over the stage, the rest of whatever venue you're at empties because they all flock to the stage to talk to him, to listen to him, and to experience his magic. I've had some odd moments with him over time, but I always enjoy to see you on stage. I'm talking about none other than the CEO of Close, one of the most energetic speakers I've ever to have witnessed on stage. So no pressure on you, brother. And of course, I'll stop rambling. Let's have a look at the intro we have on Steli Efti. Yes, and that intro was amazing. So that worked like it. Brother, it's good to see you. So this time, no intro for you. They were like, hey, he's so amazing. The man doesn't even need an intro. Steli Efti of Close has joined on stage. How are you, my friend?
My man, what an intro. I could listen to you for 30 minutes, but I think it would be painful for everybody else. Even without intro, it's good to be virtually with you here today and tonight.
Thank you very much. Now our talk's called Time to Get Out Your Hands and Get Them All Nice Dirty. Remote is the new reality. First and foremost, where are you at right now?
I am in Germany right now. I was supposed to be in New York, but on my way there, I kind of decided to stick around in Europe. I have a lot of family here, and it turned out to be a pretty good idea. So I've been in Europe for longer this year than in over a decade. I've been here for like 5 months now or something.
Yeah, I mean, New York wouldn't probably be the most pleasant of places being right now during this crisis. Now I'm thinking, most people are saying, yeah, holy shit, suddenly this crisis came and we suddenly had to go remote. We had to suddenly reinvent ourselves. But you're not remote. You're even cooler than that. You're fully distributed, right?
That is absolutely correct. Yeah.
Tell me, what does that mean?
That means that we don't have an office, a headquarter, or offices. And when we hire, it doesn't truly matter. It doesn't matter, where and when people work, as long as they're productive. So we are a small team, 45 people in 14 different countries. And we have been remote for, I think now 6 or 7 years.
And the interesting thing is, it still says on your LinkedIn, I like sniffing around on other people's LinkedIns. It's kind of a creepy touch I have. It says it's a sales communication platform of the future. But then again, I think the future is probably now where everyone's kind of going all remote and whatnot. So how did Corona, how did COVID-19 impact your business?
Yeah, the future is coming at us at an increasing speed. So that's for sure. I think for us, we've been in a very fortunate position for a variety of reasons. One, we didn't have to shift our way of working as much as others. Obviously, this impacts everybody. And even if you work typically from home, you don't typically work from home while your entire family is there as well, and there's a global pandemic going on, right? So it's like nobody is getting through this time without some adjustments and some challenges, and neither did we. But in terms of the way we collaborated, in terms of the way our work worked, nothing really changed or changed too much. And that was a blessing for sure. I think at the beginning we were quite nervous and trying to figure out what do we need to do to make sure that we're going to be able to weather the storm no matter how strong the wins would be, and no matter how long this is going to take. So we snapped into action quite energetically, as you would imagine, I think end of February, beginning of March, to prepare ourselves in the best possible way. And that ended up being like you want it to be, where we set a plan in motion for the world to be ending, and things now have been not as bad for us. And we've noticed that there's a lot of new businesses starting. There's a lot of new companies that need sales software. So, you know, we've not been either one of the companies that have been exploding because everybody's, ordering home gym equipment or something like that. We've not been on that end, but we've also fortunately not been at the type of business that had to shut down or where revenue, dropped to zero. With some good growth, we had some churn because some of our customers are hurting and had to let go people. But all in all, we've been in a pretty strong position.
Now, I like to kind of take a very different angle of this, because the idea of the whole late night founder talks was also to, have a bit of time for a chit chat other than energetic keynotes being whooped right into our face, which is what you stand for. And again, I always enjoy having you on stage because I know, that'll work. It'll be good. Now, I'm quite curious what some people know about you or not know about you. So you spent part of your childhood in Germany, right? You weren't necessarily the one who excelled in academia, to say it friendly. And then one day at the tender age of 19, if I recall correctly, we're like, okay, F it. I'm going to the US. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. Right?
Almost, yeah. It was at 18, I dropped out of school. It was actually 23 when I moved to the US. So it was I was a bit older, but still pretty young.
But I mean, so I got that kind of wrong on the years, but yeah, close enough. That's a close miss. But the thing is, for me, what I find so intriguing is that's something a lot of people dream of. And it sounds so easy looking at your story. So he goes to the US, yada, 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 Y Combinator, boom, amazing rocket science stuff. But that's not the way it is, right? And I'm assuming there were probably a lot of days where you were in your bed or on your couch back in Germany going like, man, I wish I could do this, but, and probably you found a shit ton of reasons why it wouldn't work. What kind of the doubts you had, and how do you get past that?
Yeah, so it's in the yada, yada, yada in your summary where all the magic lies, right? It's all those things that don't make for great stories sometimes, that are the hard lessons that you need to learn to excel or not. So it was definitely not as easy as I thought it would be. I had the magic of the ignorance of saying, I'm going to go over to the US, I'm going to take over the world, and I'm going to change the world. But I also had something else that really helped me. I didn't have the smarts, unfortunately, to learn as fast as I needed to, but I had a very high tolerance for pain. So I was not full of doubt. My doubts were different, I think, than most people's doubts. My doubts were not, am I good enough? Maybe this isn't going to work. Am I taking too many risks? Maybe I should go back and try something simpler or easier. That was not what was going through my head. I just knew every day that I sucked and that my execution sucked. And I knew I could have been more productive, and I knew I should have taken more risk, and I knew I should have done a better job trying to convince somebody to join me and work with me, invest money in me. And so I was self-criticizing myself pretty brutally, but I never thought about going back, or I never thought about quitting. I just took my beatings, my verbal and emotional beatings, every single day. And I don't know why, but the going back or quitting wasn't an option. But I had to learn a lot of lessons quite painfully until I finally kind of figured it out and started to know my way around entrepreneurship.
So let me jump in here now. In what year did you leave Germany? Just
2007.
2007. Now, Germany, and again, I'm half German, so I can say this, Germany isn't always, it's not always the most entrepreneurial country where you kind of instilled with that. That's a very friendly way of putting it. Who gave you that kind of basic entrepreneurial feeling? Was it from the family? Was it that you learned it somewhere, a mentor?
No, it was lack of options. It's probably personality and lack of options. My family were all factory workers. I as you said, Germany is not a very entrepreneurial place. And I remember growing up, all the options that were offered to me were, you're going to go and work for a big car company, and then, hopefully you'll retire and have a good retirement there. And entrepreneurship was never on the table. I was lucky that I hated school, and I didn't want to go work for a car company. I was not interested in, in those kind of jobs, but I was always very ambitious. I felt like I was called for greatness and I would do big things in life. I just didn't know what that meant. And then I got lucky that I had a big argument with one of my brothers once about success in life. And he said, all right, smartass, if you're not going to become a doctor or lawyer or sell drugs to make lots of money, how are you going to get rich, right? What are you going to do? And I didn't have an answer to that question. And that led to a chain of events that made me discover books, start reading books. And then I started reading about entrepreneurs. And then I realized, wait a second, I don't have to have a PhD to start a business, and nobody has to be my boss. And I can make a business as big as I can with no limitations. Sign me up. That's it. That's going to be my way. And that was kind of around the age of 18. So I think for me, when people ask me, why have you been a serial entrepreneur? I always say a lack of options. I wanted to be successful, and I didn't know anything else that I thought could work for me. So that's the path I chose.
Now, tell me, again, you make it kind of sound so simple. So yeah, you couldn't go back. It's like jumping out of a plane. You're going to land eventually, death or honor. That's kind of, let's see what kind of the dice turn out to be. But the thing is for me, so let's talk it through. So you essentially go like, okay, got to go to the US, got to go to the Bay Area, as the cool kids call it. And so you go off and buy a ticket and get into the plane, or what was your research into this whole thing?
I grew up in the 80s, so I watched a ton of movies of some hero character, right, doing some stupid thing, arriving at the big city to chase their dreams. And yeah, they go through some hardship, but it's not too bad. And then boom, they accomplish all their dreams and they become the hero. And that's pretty much my game. That was my game plan. I was like, I'm going to fly over to San Francisco, and then I'm going to be this 80s movie hero character that walks around the city, and meets the right people and works hard and then eventually conquers the world. And it was sort of like that, but not quite. Not quite as linearly in like a three-step storytelling process. No, the truth is that I did arrive with no plan. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have a visa. I didn't have an apartment. My English was pretty shitty. And the first couple of weeks were kind of adventurous. I met a lot of people. And now in hindsight, I met some insane people, like lots of billionaires. Like in the first 2 weeks, I met like 6 people that became, incredible entrepreneurs and really big. I just didn't know it.
Wait. I have to cut you in there. That's a bit quick for me. So you get off the plane, you have no visa, no job, no place to stay. And then within 2 weeks, you meet a bunch of billionaires to be.
No.
You're kind of missing out the interesting part there.
Okay. So you want to hear it? You got to hear it. I can tell you stories. So very first day that I was in the Valley, I wanted to stay in my hotel room, right? I was like, I heard about this thing called jet lag. I'd never traveled before that far. I'm like, I heard this thing about jet lag. Maybe I should just stay in this hotel room. Who knows? Maybe the jet lag is dangerous. I was afraid to go out and interact with the world, honestly. But then I was like, well, this sucks. This is not like the movie. Like I arrived in San Francisco and then what? I stayed and watched television in a hotel room. Like I have to go and meet somebody. And back in the day, there was a thing called meetup.com where you could just find events and meetups in the city. And so I browsed around that side. There was a geek dinner in San Francisco. I go there, and by sheer luck of the ignorant, I sat in a group, and then at first, the person that was sitting next to me was Dave McClure, and he was showing some other guy, this was prior to 500 Startups, he was showing a guy some kind of a startup.
Wait. 1 second, for the not newer ones here, Dave McClure, that's the gentleman of the PayPal mafia, right?
Yes.
Like Dave effing McClure, as he would normally be referred to. So by sheer chance, you sit next to Dave McClure.
But he's not interested in me, right? So that's not even the story. He was showing some app to a friend, and I wanted to make conversation, and it's just awkwardly, I didn't know how to do it smoothly. And eventually Dave actually looked at me angrily and was like, sorry, could you just back off and let me talk to my friend here and show him the app? I was like, all right, sorry. And then I turned around to my right and I talked to a friendlier human being at that night, some guy, some entrepreneur. And then he was like, wait a second, you just arrived and you don't have a visa, you don't know anybody. That's a cool story. You should talk to Robert Scoble, which is another person that's an OG of the Valley that many people might not know. And so Robert Scoble was the biggest blogger, the biggest tech blogger at the time, one of the biggest influencers in Silicon Valley. And he comes over, he chit-chats with me, and he's like, oh, you're so cute. You just arrived here. You don't know anybody. Oh, that's cool. Call me tomorrow. I'm like, okay. The next morning, I call Robert Scoble out of my hotel room, arms pit sweaty. I'm nervous. I don't even know why I should call him. Like, he just said, call me. I don't know exactly what this is about. So I call him. And he asked me, what hotel are you staying at? I'm like, Hotel California in Palo Alto. He's like, all right, I'm going to be there in 10 minutes. Stay outside. I'm like, okay. I wait outside. He picks me up with his car. We drive to some coffee shop. We order coffee. We sit down. And then he tells me, well, tell me about you. And as I start, he goes, no, wait. He goes back to his car. This is pre-iPhone, people, just to set the historic track record. And he brings out just a massive camera equipment. He sets everything up. He mics me up and he's like, all right, so who are you? And he proceeds to interview me for an hour, right? That interview is very painful. If anybody wants to search for it, it's easily findable, and you'll see how Bambi-eyed I look there. My English is terrible. I don't know what I'm talking about. But Robert was really cool to me, and he did one thing, and that led to all these meeting all these YC, the Dropbox founders and a bunch of other people during that time, which is he spoke at a conference event that night in San Francisco, and he said, Steli, are you free tonight? Do you want to come to that event? And I said, I'm free for the rest of the year. I have no plans. Oh, sure, I want to come. So he brings me with him, and he gives a talk, and a bunch of other people give talks. And at the end of that event, SF New Tech, people could raise their hand to get the mic for 30 seconds. It was called 30-second soapbox, and make a pitch. Say, I'm trying to find a co-founder, or we're raising money, whatever else, to the audience. And again, my inner voice was like, just shut the fuck up. The day was so great. You met Robert Scoble. You came to this conference for free. Don't take any risks. Just chill. But then there was this other side of me that was like, that's lame. That's not what a hero would do. Just take the mic and say something. So I picked up the mic and I said, hey, this is my first day in the US. I need friends. If you want to have a Greek-German friend, come and say hi. And the audience lost their mind. People were cheering. And at the end of the event, there were the 4 speakers surrounded by people. And by far, the biggest crowd was surrounded, I was surrounded by a huge crowd of people that just wanted to give me their phone number and be like, yes, we'll hang out. We'll be friends with you. We'll show you around. And that first day led to 3 weeks of meeting a shit ton of people, going to all kinds of parties. And it was fun, but honestly, it wasn't productive. I became friends with some people, but I didn't, it was not that first beautiful day led to all these things happening for me entrepreneurial in an easy way. After that, the first couple of weeks of just meeting lots and lots of influential people, I proceeded with 5 years of suffering and pain and failure and not being able to raise money, not being able to build a team and not launching and making all the mistakes in the book. But the first couple of days were pretty cool.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing that story. I hadn't heard of that before. And I'm loving this kind of naive approach. And I have a podcast with a friend of mine. He said, as a founder, you need the ideal intelligence set. I said, so what does that mean? He said, smart enough to have ideas and dumb enough to execute them. And I kind of quite like that whole thing. And it kind of goes in line with that because I love that willpower and again, also the naive approach. And then again, also kind of fortune favoring the brave, that you sit next to Dave McClure, bump into Robert Scoble, but then also have, having the balls to follow up through and giving the interview and going there and taking those 30 seconds. And you talked early on about becoming a superhero, and then opportunity comes along and you build up upon that. Now, you said the next 5 years suck. So I'm taking first few days, you're like, boom, I'm going to be the next rock star here. This is going to be amazing. Like, they've been waiting for me. And then you get a kick right in the nuts, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think that kick in the nuts, again, a lot of this is self-inflicted. I think that after 2 weeks of just meeting with people every day, all day, I started to panic because I was like, wait a second, I've been in the US 2 weeks already. I still don't have a visa. I don't have an apartment. I'm still in this hotel, which is expensive. Still don't have an apartment. Still don't have a team. Like, I haven't really made any progress. I just met a ton of people and everybody's friendly, but I need to like get my shit together. And that's when I stopped spending time with these people. And I like try to find an apartment. And then I tried to find a lawyer that would actually take my case to try to help me get a work visa. And then I dealt with like a lot of these kind of things. And then I try to find somebody to work with me, kind of find a developer team to start working with me on my idea, and then try to raise money. And that's where kind of all the difficult, painful, making mistakes, not knowing my way around, not knowing how to execute. I had no experience about software. I didn't know anything about product development. I didn't know anything about fundraising. I didn't know anything about any of these things. And I was a very slow learner. The information 2007 was way less than it is today in terms of how to do these things well. And when you would ask people for direct feedback, a lot of investors, for instance, I would pitch to the best investors in the world. Like, I got those meetings early, right? Even the first year. And I would tell them, listen, I know my pitch sucks. Just tell me what it is that sucks. And they would always, I mean, now I know those were real, I mean, whatever, that's the way that the world works. But they were like, no, this was, I don't really have feedback. This was really, no, solid. Just stay in touch with us. It's a bit too early. And now if I show you those presentations, you were pissing your pants laughing. I mean, those decks were like, it was Clown Town show, but nobody was giving me the truth straight, right? They were all just like, no, this is good. Just stay in touch. But just not right there.
Now, tell me, Steli, like, I'm assuming like very often you're given that opportunity in life to meet important people. And I think a lot of people are worried to use that opportunity because they were worried in burning these bridges too early. Like, they're getting that one shot or that one opportunity, they F up and they think they're done. Listening to you, you were going flat out, going boom, 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 until it worked. How did you not burn yourself?
I still think that that's bullshit, to be honest.
Cool.
I think that because there are people that the first time they met me, they're very important. I won't name names, but they're very important public people that I know for a fact. I'll throw
one name, brother.
I'll throw Eric Ries out there. Eric is a good friend of mine now, the lean startup godfather, right? Boom, when he first met me, I guarantee you he thought I was an idiot, and he was right. He was actually very smart. And he was one of the advisors of an investor that was trying to sway to give me money. And I do believe, and I don't know this for a fact, I haven't talked to Eric about this in person, but I'm pretty sure that Eric advised not to invest in my company at the time. And I hope he did, because it was the right call. The startup wasn't successful. I wasn't ready. I was full of shit and didn't know what I was doing. So it's not that he was wrong. So when I first met him, his opinion of me was not very high, I think. Not that I'm not a good person, just that I don't know what I'm doing. But he met me a second time, and he met me a third time. And then he started reading about me. And then we started exchanging things. Then he started inviting me to speak at his conferences. Then we started being friends and helping each other out. Then I've become an advisor to his current company. So 13 years later, from when we first met, he probably told somebody, don't give this dude money, to now saying, you know what, you should help me with my next business, right? The important thing is not the snapshot, that idea of like you have one chance in your life. That might be true in some scenarios, but I believe that it's better to show people trajectory. Like, maybe when they meet you first, they're not impressed. But you know what impresses me most is not somebody being great at the first meeting. It's somebody becoming better and better over time. The first time I met you, I'm like, I'm not sure. But a year later, I get an update from you and I'm like, wow, Daniel has really made something happen the last year. This person's going somewhere. This is inspiring. Then 3 years later, I see you and we're on the same stage. I'm like, Jesus, I'm like, then I actually, like, I'm much more invested in you. I'm much more excited. I'm like, dude, I met you when you were nobody. Now you're like crushing it. That's incredible. I don't believe that there's one chance. And so you better wait till you have all your ducks in a row and your pitch is perfect and you're perfect, because your life is going to pass by if you wait for the perfect moment, at least in my mind.
And I'm loving that approach, because for me, like a lot of startups I work with, I tell them, because they always say, like, you work with so many successful people. What is it? And for me, the answer is, and also looking at my last 10 years, it's, talent and hard work and whatnot. But the one thing I've noticed all of them have is absolute perseverance. There's nothing and no one stopping them. So that's basically, you also say, no, it's about perseverance, right?
Yeah, I think, I was always joking with a friend, what you don't have in smarts, you have to make up in hustle, right? So at the end of the day, at the end of the day, if you just don't give up, it's going to be really difficult to beat you. And that's what it is. And that's true for life. That's true for your competition. And that's even more true for yourself. If you just don't give up on yourself, no matter how many mistakes you make, no matter how many things you fuck up, if you just keep going, sooner or later, you'll beat yourself. You'll become a better version of yourself. And that's all we can hope for.
And with every knockdown, you get stronger and you want it more and more. And I love that story. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I interviewed Peter Westerbacher. And I love the story of Rovio and Angry Birds, and Angry Birds being actually app number 51. 51 times, 50 times doing something, not being good enough. Like, I'll do it again. I'll do it again. And I mean, that's perseverance right there. Now, we have 5 more minutes left. And I must say, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I think we could talk for 2 or 3 hours, but I just kind of want to give it a bit of a wrap. 2 questions I have. Now, the first question is, do you think that your story is repeatable? I know it's a difficult one because I think there's an element of luck and opportunity and then following through.
Yeah.
If your sons were to say, this is what I want to do.
The answer is always yes and no, right? Because yes, on the one hand, because nothing I've done is that special. Like, it's not like I'm a once in a lifetime genius. God knows, everybody knows that's not true. And it's not like I have some kind of talent that other people can't learn. But I did have a lot of luck, an insane amount of luck. And there's like luck and timing, and there is some talent or certain strengths that I used, and it's in that mix that makes your story. And so it's not repeatable in the sense that I would advise anybody to do exactly what I did, or even tell them if they did what I did, they would get the same results. But certain tactics and philosophies I didn't invent, and so they are repeatable. Other people can learn from my story, take away certain things that work for them and make them their own and get results and get success from that. That I believe, but so it's a bit of yes and a bit of no. It always depends.
Now, for me, it was interesting in this talk. I wanted to know some of the stories and some of the parts of your story I hadn't been able to understand in the past, because that's kind of the part you don't find too much on. A lot of what you've done in the last 5 to 10 years, we can find it. We can read your amazing books and look at some of your talks. And whoever's not seen Steli, have a look at them. They're really, I mean, don't want to overdo it, but they're quite good. Now, I've been asking this question most people I've had the chance of talking to today. And I was saying I have a little bit of a podcast, as you as well, and it's in German, it's called Future Weekly. And what we do at the end of every podcast is we try and create 1 moonshot and 1 prediction. And if I were to ask you, Steli, now, we've seen you've had some brave moves in the past. And if you were to formulate 1 moonshot, something where you say, that's a moonshot, this is something that would be really amazing, and 1 prediction of what you think is going to happen. It could be in any field. What would your moonshot and what would your prediction be? Easy question at the end, I thought.
You asked the wrong man, my friend, for both these things. I think in terms of prediction, I don't know. I think that, well, let's take the subject of our chat originally. I do think that remote and working in a distributed fashion is not going to go away. And it's going to happen faster than I thought. I built my business around this, but I didn't think it would happen as fast as, I mean, this whole situation is accelerating a lot of things. I think one of them is going to be more technology, not less, no matter if you like it or not. And it's going to be more distributed work, not less, no matter if you like it or not. So for all the people that are resisting some of the changes that they think are going to come, just tell yourself to shut the fuck up. Like, you can't fight reality. Just get on board and ask yourself, how do I deal with this, if I like it or not? Moonshot, I'll pass on that. I'll give the moonshot to the next speaker. That's a very good friend of mine. I know that you're chit-chatting with him. He has lots of moonshots ideas. I'm going to give him mine as a bonus. And I'm just going to stick with the good old hard work is never going to go out of style, and smart work is never going to go out of style. And during this time, I'll end you with a quote, which is a quote that I remind myself oftentimes of. It's not the strongest that survive. It's the most adaptable that do. And so in that sense, I think we all need to work really hard to get with the program and adapt faster and sooner and change quicker as the world is spinning a little bit faster right now.
Amen, brother. What a fitting way to end our little bit of a conversation. And I know we went in a bit of a different direction, but I just felt, that so remote, we can read so much about it, understanding how you made difference back in the day when opportunity came along, but chances and all these predictions would have been speaking against you. I really love that you shared that story. I enjoyed myself so much talking to you, and I'm looking forward to the day when we meet, hopefully not so distant future, from person to person. Until then, stay safe, have an amazing time, and looking forward when our paths cross again. Steli Efti, stay safe, brother.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was an interesting conversation. And the idea of this whole late night founders talks was just to dig a little deeper, to talk about some things we sometimes don't have the chance to, or we normally would when we're having a beer. Now, for me, it's time to hand over the stage one last time. And the next talk is called Flat is the New Growth. Time to rethink and realign. Steli just said it. We've got some amazing speakers coming up. We've got Marvin Liao, Sheel, Mohnot. We had him early on. He has the lovely nickname of El Patron. What a great way to put it. Cristobal, Alonso is sitting there like a patron as well. We're like, oh, so it's a late night. I'm here. I'm in it to win it. Now it's time for me to hand over my stage to none other than Francesco Cracolici. Stage is yours, Francesco.
Building a company with the potential to dominate the global market is a complex and hard thing to do. Top entrepreneurs who have built dominating products, raised millions of venture capital, and got millions of users will give you insider tips and tricks how they have succeeded and where they have failed. You will learn from investors, founders, and industry experts as well.
So, yes, today we are going to talk about how you guys, funders, can keep up during the crisis. And we're going to have three of the brightest minds in the whole European startup ecosystem, people that really are the top notch in the field. The first one is Marvin Liao, that spent 10 years at Yahoo, worked and invested in more than 450 early stage startups, and was VC partners at 500 startups. So Marvin, are you here?
I'm here. Hi, everyone. Hey, Francesco.
Hey, Marvin.
What up?
The next one is actually considered by Crunchbase the most prolific fintech angel investors. And these guys are absolutely amazing. The amount of knowledge this guy has is stunning. And I'm talking about Sheel Mohnot. Are you here, Sheel?
Yeah. Hey, guys. How are you?
Here we go. So Sheel became an angel investor after creating and selling 4 fintech startups. So not bad. And now we have the last of the speakers. So the only European here. Apart from obviously me. And this guy actually created an accelerator called Startup Wise Guys. Is the most prolific accelerator for number of investment in the whole Europe. And here we go with Cristobal. Are you here?
I think I am, yes. Starting with you being the late night and the late morning, guys. We have a competition about, who's going to suffer the most on this one.
Cool. Another thing, why Cristobal is that famous, because he's an amazing basketball player. So that's the reason why we brought him here. So I want to say something before starting with the questions. So the average successful startup life from the beginning of the idea, let's go through investment seed, Series A, Series B, Series C, and then exit, is around 9.2 years. So the average life of a successful startup is 9.2 years. The average time between a crisis in tech and another is 8.5 years. So it's really likely that if you have a startup and you're successful, you're gonna end up in one of those crises. It happened in 2008 and it's happening right now. So if you guys are experienced startups, I think will happen to any successful startup for the next years. So it's something completely normal. And now we're trying to discover the best practice to keep up with it. I'll start with the first question. So Marvin, the first question is for you. I know you look like 20 years old. You look super young, but actually you've been through 3 crises.
Actually, this is my 5th one. You forget 96 in Canada, 97, 98 in Asia, 2000, 2001. I was in the dot-com bubble. So I was at a startup that imploded during that time. 2008, 2009, which actually was pretty good for me personally. And 2020 still to be determined.
And then the question I have for you is, how many of those crises did you create, Marvin?
2 out of the 5. 2 out of the 5.
Okay, 40%.
Cool. So what are, according to you, the best practices that work in every crisis you basically been to?
Yeah, so I would say this is actually the advice. So I've been spending last 8 or 9 weeks speaking with a lot of my old portfolio company founders, and the first thing I do, I sort of just ground them on sort of like how bad it could be. So I think one of the things as founders, you tend to be optimistic, which is a good thing, right? And I would say almost optimistic to a naive point of view. You have to be to some sort of like stage to sort of like go through this. And if you've never been through a recession, I don't think you just don't know what it's like. And so the first thing I tell all my founders is like, you got to sort of like figure out new scenarios of like, there's a plan that you thought what this year was going to be like, right? Then there's the worst case scenario. And what I would say is just like, what you need to do is have an even worse, even more severe case. So I tell them, go and reforecast the rest of the year. If you hit like 10 or 20% of your forecast, and then figure out sort of what the cost structure is to do that, right? Because I think the reality is that a lot of folks just like their worst case scenario is almost like a mid case scenario of what it could be, how bad this could be. And so as I'm looking up through a lot of the data, the reality is that I don't think people really understand how bad these recessions and how these situations could be, where like if you're in 2001, the reality is that, say even in 2001, there were literally like 5 companies that were hiring in Silicon Valley during that time. And that took like 2 years before it sort of came out. And so I don't think it's going to be as bad as that, but I do think that you're going to see, we've already had something close to like 30,000 layoffs here in San Francisco, Bay Area alone, just in the last couple of weeks, right? From some very, very top-notch companies. So first thing, reforecast, then you figure out what your cost structure is and are there ways you can reduce your cost structure. And then the next thing you want to do is understand your cash situation of like, are there ways that you can actually bring in sort of accounts receivables forward? Everything's about managing your cash flow and making sure you have at least, in my opinion, 18 to 24 months of cash to survive the downturn, because I don't think there's going to be a lot of money coming in afterwards.
So perfect. We can jump to the second question to Sheel because that's really related. So Marvin say that there's going to be a lot of money afterwards. So what do you think the classical VC, seed stage, Series A, no later than that, is actually focusing on what are the top priorities right now from for VCs right now, Sheel?
Yeah, so I think like, the top priority for most VCs, we're a few months, two and a half months into this, being known as a crisis. And the first couple of months, it was a lot of figuring out in our own portfolios, like which companies are in trouble, which companies can we help, all of that kind of stuff was the first couple of months. And so activity was definitely down during that first couple of months. Now we're coming out of it, and I think we're starting to invest again. But we're investing a little bit differently than we used to. So a couple of things, like the prices are coming down a little bit, the valuations are down. And then there's a lot of more interest in particular companies that'll do well during this crisis and sort of the new normal. There is a lot of uncertainty on what the new normal will be. So to the extent that companies are handling that new normal and not in the middle of it, I think that it's good for those companies.
I would definitely want to add one point. It's just like understand that for a lot of VCs, like particularly the big VC funds, they're not oriented toward managing their firm and through Zoom, as well as sort of like also meeting new founders and doing that through Zoom, right? So there's a real big reshift. And so I think the process is just going to take longer as well too for new deals. So it's a different investment process now going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and yeah, there are a lot of, at the seed stage, it's a little bit easier to get a deal done without meeting in person. At Series A, B, C, if you're writing $5+ million checks into a company, you really want to meet that person in person. To exactly what Marvin said. Now, funds are starting to do it, but what they're doing is they're relying a lot more on the seed stage VCs. So it matters a lot more that your seed stage VCs have a strong relationship with that Series A, B, C investor, because the seed stage VC, that you have met and knows you well, can really spend a lot of time with that Series A investor if they know each other, and that's what I've been doing with my portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Totally get it. So just a more, let's say, detailed question. So usually the general advice could be right, could be wrong, about what YC and other people say for Series A in startups. So startups that are seeking the Series A is to have from 12 to 20 months of runway. So do you think right now this advice is kind of wrong and the runway should be longer than that?
I would say, look, my take is that I generally think that it's going to take I'm just pessimistic, where I think this crisis is way worse than a lot of people think. And so hope is not a strategy. Hope that 12 months of cash runway is enough. I think I'd rather you be, as a company, this is what I tell my founders, I'd rather you be over prepared, right? Assume the worst and plan for it. And if you're wrong, then no big deal, right? You have a bunch of extra money in the bank. If you're, but if you're right, that means you can actually survive. And so I think there's, I do think it's just better be safe than sorry, especially in crises.
Yeah, I will add, Francesco, one thing is that I will ponder survival over growth right now. So it's more important to be alive than to keep growing. So if you find an extra way to survive an extra 6 months, just survive. Then when things start picking up, you might take again the growth stage. Especially as Marvin said, if you don't know your Series A investors now, you're not going to meet them. It's going to take a long time until you meet them. You make that confidence, that trust over Zoom, or not meeting them in person. No? The second part, I think, is also seed and early seed. Is we take the discussion about what does it take to be break even, because actually a lot of our companies could actually break even in 6-9 months. It will not have the growth that it will require for the next round of investment, but it will actually put them in a position to manage their cash until they understand better the market and where to take their bets, right? So I think the extra thing is that, hey, maybe there is a situation in which being break-even versus keep growing makes sense. Because again, I do agree with Marvin that it might take much longer than you expect to get the next round.
Mm-hmm. Great. Cool. So I'll go straight away to the next question for you, Cristobal. So you working with DG, you work with a lot of startups, mainly B2B, correct? Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Cool. So, and as probably everyone knows, is B2B is the most affected, let's say, industry that actually go affected by COVID. So, what are the best pivot you've seen so far? The case of the company, creating a new product from scratch and literally
Well, yeah, I am going to tell you examples of my portfolio. I'm sure there is much fascinating and inspiring ones. Actually, the first big pivot is at a country level. So within 2 days of the lockdown being announced, we have a hackathon, the Hack the Crisis hackathon happening in Estonia. And within 4 days, it was happening in Latvia, right? So to me, the first big pivot is how quickly, I think Sheel actually said it very well, and before even the previous talk, is in 2 days, they stopped complaining and they stopped saying, how do we find solutions? And this coming for small countries, but extremely digital countries. So I think that almost plain the way about, guys, we need solutions. We don't need complainings. We don't need scenarios. We need to find ways to keep moving, right? Within that one, and I can tell you, we have a company called Sheel, Silos was doing basically volunteer management for big conferences, clearly gone. Market is gone for 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months. They went right away into how do we manage volunteers to serve underserved people like senior citizens that are not going to be able to have deliveries, that they don't know how to use computers, that they cannot use any of the basically value chain, supply chain. You know, they're now present in 6 countries within this moment. They're actually, their brand is getting extended. So to me, it was very close to their vision, but in a completely different market. And within 5 days, they were operating here. We have seen Porter in the US, basically helping fast-moving consumer goods to understand analytics, to understand what do the products they need to have on the shelves. Within 10 days, they were trying to understand the demand based on COVID. So, if the lockdown is hitting more in Idaho, there's going to be a toilet paper need within 2 days. And they were actually producing that, but also giving the product for free for municipalities, for governments, for public institutions. So again, all of them are helping them on their core direction in a completely different way to serve, right? So to me, those are the smart pivots in which most of them are getting brand awareness, they're getting more revenue opportunities, but also they are not getting too far away from a product that was working in the previous situation until they understand how does the economy look in the next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, because we still don't know. We're making predictions. We're starting to understand a bit of what is the scenario to look like, but it's taking 2 months just to understand where we are. Now we can understand, okay, let's now predict where we are going to be.
Cool. Does anyone want to add anything on this? Okay. No. Cool.
Sure.
So, Marvin, what about you? Well, where did you actually see the best people in among all the startups that you all actually have seen, worked with, or invested? So, where did you see the best startups that choose the best strategy to tackle the crisis?
Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? I think this term pivot, I think it's one thing I just caution sort of like startups, right? I think that, for example, like if you are a travel industry focused startup or an SMB focused startup, I'm like, I don't know how easy it is to sort of pivot into a complete, like going from like SMB to focus on enterprise, right? Like that's a weird thing. And we're like, because bear in mind, we're like 2.5, 3 months into it. So I just think like right now it's still too early. And I think you want to be very thoughtful, like any pivot, whether pre-crisis or post-crisis, like you want to be thoughtful about what you're pivoting into. So at the end of the day, I think right now, like I'm of the view where I'm just like, understand sort of like just how badly damaged sort of like your sector is, figure out, can you survive? Are there ways you can bring money in? And then kind of like be thoughtful about where you can slowly move into things. But like, I don't know if like I'm a believer in sort of like pivoting so quickly, right? And I don't think it's that easy to do. And I'm also the view where I'm like, all right, like if you're focusing on the travel industry, like it's hard to do. You already have a set of customers already. Like someone will die, but the reality is that industry will come back in a year or two, probably 2 years. So what are the things you can do right now to survive until the market comes back, right? Like what are the tactics you can do to sort of like manage cost structure, but even potentially sort of like maybe find other things and products you can sell to your customers, right? That they need. So it's like that old saying, it's just like find out what your customers sort of like bleeding neck is and sell them bandages. And so figure out what those things are. They're not all going to go out of the business. So I don't know if I'm a fan of sort of like pivoting even in this time, right? Like just like, I just think you want to be thoughtful about that. That's sort of my main point.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Sheel, and so basically there are two kind of, let's say, possible scenarios likely that happened during the last 2 months. The first scenario is the most likely, is someone that go cut all the cost, and the startups obviously have a lot less revenue than before. And right now I'm trying to get more runaway, so they try to raise money to get more money to actually keep up with the operations. The second scenario is someone that is doing maybe is managing a delivery startups, or maybe is managing a telehealth startup or fintech startup that actually are kind of growing during this period. And obviously the metrics are impressive. So in this case, in the first case, so someone that got a really thin runway wants to keep up. what would you suggest to do and focus on when you talk to investors? And in the second case, when you basically your business is growing a lot, and obviously when you talk to investors, the investors know that it's growing a lot thanks to the COVID and not thanks to the actual, not thanks to your team or your. What would you suggest to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, in the first one, first of all, as a business, make sure, you know, it's unfortunate, but you have to do what it takes to survive. So make the cuts as soon as possible. And generally speaking, make them as deep as possible, as quickly as possible. So I think that's what you have to do. And then you have to show that, like, you have to show that when we come out of this, you're actually better positioned, if that's the case, you know, and do all you can to position your company to be better positioned as we come out of this. Yeah, it's a tough time to raise for those companies, and be prepared to take a hit on valuation and dilution. Many companies are being recapped right now. In the second case, you know, I think this is more than a short-term blip. For some companies, there'll be a short-term increase and then it won't be lasting. But I think, you know, you have to prove that what COVID does is accelerate the future of your company, and is not like a blip and go back to business. It's a blip and then, you know, increase because more people are buying from delivery. There's more e-commerce, all these other things that have happened that, you know, are a sea change movement. And I think if you are one of those fortunate companies, then now is the time to raise, because a lot of investors are looking to deploy capital.
And so I've heard something controversial so far. A lot of startups, they basically have a good valuation, but given that they run out of money, run out of cash, they always, right now, in this moment, trying to basically give discounts to investors. Is something you recommend to do? So I'm buying right now. I'll give you my share, 50% of the valuation.
So, sorry, I didn't understand the question.
So, like, would you suggest to startups to actually raise money with a super discounted valuation?
So, you know, look, you do what you have to do to survive. Ideally, you don't do that. But what ends up happening is if you raise at a much lower valuation than your past valuation, then you can argue to get a founder top up where they give you more shares. And then it really hurts your previous investors, but sometimes that's what you have to do. And we're seeing that happen all the time. Like every couple of days in the last few weeks, I've gotten folks inbound from folks who are doing what's called a recapitalizing the company.
Marvin, do you agree with that? Because you'd be concerned about it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Like, I just think like you do what you need to do, and just to give, you know, sort of like other sort of comments on sort of your earlier question and on Sheel's thoughts of just like, I know this is a very US thing, or just like make the cuts. And when we say make the cuts, you know, the context in the US is very easy to fire people. It's not so easy to do in Canada or in Europe. But one thing I will say is just like, it's about cost cutting. So what are the things you can actually do? Can you do pay deferrals? Can you go to 3 days a week? Whatever it is to sort of reduce your cost structure. And I'm in agreement with Sheel, where it's just like what you found, at least in San Francisco, what I've seen is that there's a bunch of companies that made a bunch of cuts like in March, and they weren't deep enough, and they're doing cuts again now because like they've realized it's really bad for morale to do like several cuts in a row. So you just see this sort of like the ship just starts to sort of like sink. And so that's the reason you want to sort of make those cuts as deep as you can, you know, and obviously make sure you're not cutting into bone, right? As they say, and cutting into muscle and cutting into bone, but you want to be really thoughtful and about this process. Everything you have to be thoughtful, right? Like, and I think a lot of people are just sort of like overdoing it. So just, yeah.
Cool. So just a question I want to ask to all three of you. So cutting is absolutely vital right now. Is there, let's say, what's the limit that goes from cutting is right to, you know, you're cutting too much? When is actually the limit when you should stop cutting? So is there like, if you have any key employees, you know that you shouldn't basically fire and you can keep up with the cost? Where you actually cutting too much?
This is a hard one to answer, right? Because it's a very case by case specific, company by company, industry by industry specific situation. So what I've had to do is just like you go through sort of like org charts, you go through cost structure stuff, and it's like you spend a lot of time going through this, right? And so I've done this where, and my recommendations for every single one of my companies, just like anybody here, is going to be very different. Some folks are like, okay, you only need to trim maybe 10% or do this. Like, you don't need a sales and marketing group anymore. And other ones where it's like, wow, like you're not going to be able to do anything. Like you're going to just have to take this down from like 20 people to like 4 people, right? Like just, it really depends on your situation, the industry that you're in, what's happening with the customer base, how well your business is doing, like there's a lot of it depends.
Yeah, but Francesco, just to give you a different point, and I think Marvin kind of hinted around it, US versus Europe, or maybe Canada, I don't know if I want to live in the middle or in the north of it. First is, how well have you built your company? I'm talking about companies 10 to 20 people, okay? I'm not talking companies with 500 people, which is a different dimension. So the first task, by understanding, have you built a company based on values? Are those guys following you? Do they believe it's still in the company? Because if the answer is yes, then we go to Marvin's second. I say, hey, how much you have to cut on percentage of cost? There is many ways to cut costs. It's not just firing people. Firing people, apart from the legislation part, is the easy part. But can you do it by agreeing to cut the salaries 50%? Can the founders work for free for 6 months, not to fire some of these people that has taken a long time to recruit and to onboard? Can we do invoice the payments? Can we convert some of the cash into employee stock option programs in the near future? So there is many other, I understand when you have 100 people and you need to cut 200. It might be different. But in teams of 10 and 20, which is when we find most of our seed companies, I think there is a lot of ways to cut costs that is not just firing. But of course, if you need to cut 80% of your costs, I think it's unavoidable, right? But if you are anything even up to 40% of cost reduction, I think it can be done without almost letting many people go. And playing with flexibility, playing with commitments, and it starts with the founders. I think what there is no doubt is that founders might have to even work for free or as close as they can for free for 6 months in order to defend some of the people that has taken a long time to get there, right? So there is other ways to do it. I think when you cut too much, when you lose the essence of the company, when you cannot either operate or you basically break the principles in which you were created.
Mm-hmm. So the key takeaway is basically, correct me guys if I'm wrong, cut as much as you can, but always be able to operate and try to basically expand your runway as much as you can, because you never know what's going to happen in the future. And if you are going really good, thanks to this crisis, because some startups are going really good thanks to this, try to demonstrate to you and your investors that it's not just basically a small increase, but it's actually something that's going to be stable the next futures. Correct?
Yeah. I would say the last piece particularly is like, how are you positioned for the post-COVID world, right? Because it's so different now, and so why are you going to win in the post-COVID world that we're still sort of like in the midst of?
Mm-hmm. Sheel, do you want to say anything on this?
Yeah, no, I actually agree with Marvin completely. It's all about like how you're going to win in the future. Yeah, that's
Cool. Cristobal, let's go for the last question for you. So we talk a lot about VCs, but what about angels and what about syndicates? How do you think they're going to be affected by this?
Well, I think we have to, let's say, in the European scene, 2 types of angels. Let's say the professional ones and the unprofessional ones. I think the unprofessional ones are gone for about 6 months at least, because those guys were actually putting some money on the stock, and the moment the money on the stock is down, they just retreat, right? And probably they have a couple of houses in Marbella or in the south of France, and they're, oh shit, right? So I think those guys are gone for 6 months. When are they back? I think it depends on many things, right? I think the professional investors, they're actually seeing opportunities. They're even seeing that in some seed deals that maybe a VC will get now, they can get into a bridge and opportunity. I think those guys are going to still be there, but of course they're going to be more cautious. They're going to take the valuations. I think one thing that might happen, and I have already started seeing it after 3 months, is, it was already a trend, is the syndicates, right? Because I think most of these angels, they want somebody to do the diligence, which in the past they might just say, hey, Peter wants to do the deal, I jump in, right? Now they say, well, but has anybody really looked at the accounting and the legal part the last year? So I think syndicates might become, for even a small angel tickets, more of a more. And this is why I see a lot of the business angel networks that has been very active on this, especially Nordics, Baltics, a bit less in Southern Europe. So I think there will be more syndicates, which might be more expensive for the startups, might be a bit slower for startups, but it might be actually the way to get tickets there. They might be actually be bigger on size than previous rounds, because I think those guys realize that there is no point to give you now 100K, because you're going to need at least 200K to go through the next round, right? So 100K is like just waiting for another 100K in 6 to 9 months, which doesn't allow you to execute. So I think we're going to see way less smaller rounds, super bridge rounds, larger rounds on the 200K plus with syndicates from angels. But also don't forget there is a lot of dry powder in the VCs in Europe, extremely amount of dry powder. A lot of it in early funds that were created about 2 to 3 years ago. So they actually have to still invest in the next 2 years max. So they can be a bit, in a way, prudent, but they cannot wait too long. Or they're going to have to invest everything in things they might not want to. And I think both Marvin said there is areas where there is a lot of opportunities, right? But I think on the very early stage, forget about the amateur angels, talk to the super angels or the professional angels who are still investing. Assume conditions are going to be worse. Try to get more professional syndicates to put more money, but more, in a way, guidance there, and raise more money than you wanted to do. I would say that's the last point, which is interesting, the crowdfunding, which was, the seeders in Italy was actually quite popular. I'm talking to Italy quite a bit lately, and they told me that the volumes of 1-2 million that was happening in Q1, Q4 are still there. And they were saying that as long as the stock markets don't plummet, the crowdfunding might still be working. So for some B2C, less B2B probably, crowdfunding might still be a way for some of these startups to actually raise money even more than in the past, because that might be where the non-professional angels might lead. But again, it's the same thing. It's a structure, there is some due diligence, they might trust the platform to do the work that in the past they might trust themselves to do.
Cool. Thank you so much to all 3 of us. Thank you so much to Marvin, Sheel, and Cristobal. It was absolutely great, but we need to go. We go.
Thank you, Francesco.
Yes.
As you finished before with a quote, I was in a panel with VCs and they told me, now is the time to show leadership. It's very easy to be a leader in up times. It's a very tough time to be a leader on these times, but that's when we're going to see the real entrepreneurs that can lead. And those are going to be the winners of this post-crisis, because it's going to be very difficult to be a good leader right now. But I think this is the time to show leadership.
Yeah, 100%. At least I want to say something as well. So the one really successful entrepreneur in the Valley say that, Elon Musk actually, say that basically the value of an entrepreneur it depends on how resourceful he is, and you need to be resourceful right now to keep up, and this is the perfect test. Cool. So thank you so much for everything again, and let's cut to the chase. I'll give the mic to the next speakers.
Good luck, everyone.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, Sheel. Thank you, Marvin. And thank you, Cristobal. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, ciao.
Ciao.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for these candid insights. Always a pleasure listening in. And yeah, I've enjoyed that. So we've had a long day. We've just learned the last sentence how important leadership is. What we want to do now is we want to learn, how do we build global products? We're going to be talking about some lessons learned. And speaking of which, dear audience, I know you're still out there because I can see the numbers. If you have questions, shoot them in the comments section and we'll pick up 1 or 2 maybe and ask them our 2 speakers. And the 2 gentlemen I have up next are Niket Desai, and Scott Rafer. Niket, Scott, welcome to our beautiful little virtual stage. How are you?
Prepare yourself for one cozy fireside chat. Sharpen your senses. It's gonna make you stronger. Warm up your fingers for typing interesting questions to our fantastic guests. Make yourself comfortable. Take a glass of wine, sit back, and enjoy insightful discussion.
Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And it was a pirate thing that Niket was getting me to do. I was worried he wasn't showing up.
He was, actively fighting COVID and lost an eye in the process.
And I was like, I just wrote the production office saying, what's up with Scott's eye? Because I was unsure, like, is it something like nasty? And I don't want to kind of do something inappropriate and say, hey, nice eye patch, brother. And you go like, dude, I just had a skateboarding accident yesterday. I lost my eye. You go like, that's a bad start. So
you heard what the guy said. It's easy to have two eyes in the good times. You have to see what you can do with one eye in the bad times.
Yeah, and I'm liking the pink eye patch. That's a first as well, and having pirate symbols on there.
It was a prop from a wedding.
What kind of a wedding was that?
A very California.
I am loving that. Now, we've deep dived basically into our talk already. We want to talk about lessons learned from building global products. And I mean, looking at the CVs of the two of you, we'd spend probably the next 25 minutes saying what you've all done. But to kind of summarize it super simply and super high level, Niket, you're basically an internet entrepreneur and an investment follows. Ex-Googler, ex-Motorola, you've done it all. And the things you haven't done, then again, Scott, you have done, right? You're an expert in anything retail and supply chain. You're in the advisory business. You advise both startups and corporates on how to move on. So you have all done so many amazing things. Some of your customers are Technicolor and Associated Press. So, well, let's jump right in it. So what are the lessons learned of building global products? It can't be that hard, can it?
It requires a bunch of empathy. You need to understand what people on the other side of the world need that people on your side of the world also need. Market selection is the biggest problem, right?
Now, sorry, please.
The couple examples that I point to, one very close to you, one less close to you. I was supportive of Zamanta in Ljubljana for their entire history on the board and these kinds of things, and they very quickly understood what the needs were of similar customers in many, many countries and managed to sell to them pretty much digitally without going there, right? And the more current example, there's a group in Cluj that does very well called Plannable.io. And Xenia over there, she's the Instagram workflow for marketing agencies in 30 or 40 countries, all without ever leaving Northern Romania. So, if you can have the empathy for the customer across geographies, it doesn't matter where you start.
I quite like that.
And I would say, that's a great position from Scott coming from a digital perspective. I kind of learned how to be wrong through working at Motorola when Google bought Motorola, and a few of us were assigned over there. Google is a digital first, distribute everywhere kind of company. And when we were building phones, not only do we have to change what the phones did, but also like price points and distribution. So the second half of Scott's point about empathy for who you're trying to serve is how you get to them. And so like in the US, we relied heavily on essentially retail models, but outside of that, we had no distribution chain. And so the way I actually ended up working at Flipkart was we sent a couple 100,000 phones to them, to this small e-tailer that nobody had heard of at the time back in 2013. And they said, yeah, we'll try to sell them, when we fully expected them to all come back. And through something called a Big Billions Day, which is where they have a huge sale modeled from kind of some of the giant Chinese e-commerce giants, they sold all of the phones in 24 hours. And so when they called us back and said they had sold all the phones, we were like, who is this again? And they're like, oh, it's a company called Flipkart. And that's kind of, we saw them rise too.
Is that their Singles Day?
it's their equivalent of their singles day. Exactly.
That's an amazing story. Now, we have a bit of a, as we call it, like a late night entrepreneurship talk, and we can talk about any direction we're happy to go. And there's one thing I find quite intriguing. We have quite a few seasoned entrepreneurs from the CE region listening in. And you just said, both of you said, it's very, very, very important to build empathy. How do you build empathy? How do you know how to connect with an audience that could be potentially global? And how do you know if it's working? Because you just said, look, that's what we did and that worked really well. Let's take a step back. How would you advise entrepreneurs to build empathy with their customers?
I guess for me, and this comes back to how I present startups to begin with, it's all about finding a shared pain between the customers, right? Because the empathy is sort of half the problem. They also have to be willing to take a risk on a new vendor, right? And people who are, reasonably satisfied with what's going on, even if they agree to it, if everyone agrees that everything's okay, even if it's not great, they're not going to move. People don't take risks just for optimization. They take risks because things suck. And it's a common thing here in the Valley to refer to a startup as sucking less than everybody else, right? And those are the ones that win, are the ones that suck less up front and cure a specific pain for people, and have an idea that pain exists for many, many people in many, many places in a way that's addressable by some reasonable set of software, right? You can build one thing and get to a bunch of desperate people pretty quickly.
Niket, I saw you nodding heavily.
It's not going to be a surprise that I agree with Scott. I think the other thing I would point to round out his point is we're kind of in this blessed time to build. Yeah, a lot of the time, I got my start 10 years ago, but it's very hard to be alone. So if you find yourself believing in something and you're truly alone and you haven't found some sort of online community somewhere where people feel deep, deep agreement with what you're saying, that's actually amazing. That might be more rare than the other side of that equation. And so as far as finding empathy goes, we also need to realize that you're not alone and you have to find that group of people that want to build with you. And to Scott's final point about you have to be more than just a better solution, I found that in most of my sales and work that I've done in terms of business development, we didn't really talk about the problem or the software, I should say, but we just talked about the problem and the shared kind of feeling of helplessness. And that usually was the precursor to someone saying, I'm going to take a gamble and switch things up. Counterintuitively, humans don't take risks for optimization. I agree with Scott entirely there.
I find this quite interesting. I think it's interesting that both of you say, look, it's a good time to build. And I also like the way you said, okay, look, it's hard to feel alone. Try and connect with people who have a similar feeling for that pain. Try and communicate it, try and build upon that. So it's kind of like an old startup mantra, isn't it? Do something that matters and then just execute on that. Is that basically what you say?
Well, just execute is, you just lump 99.5% of the work into, the smallest part of that. But you're nearly correct. And Niket and I are only sitting 3 kilometers apart at this point. Right, so there's certain shared culture issues here. But the getting customers to be scared of the same thing and declaring that to be the competition is a great way to rally the troops, in line with what Niket is saying, right? 6 years ago, I started working on all this supply chain stuff. Largely because it became clear to me that independent merchants would go to great lengths to survive, right? The VCs have this trope that they talk about whether or not you're a vitamin or a painkiller. And vitamins are for optimization and painkillers are for people that are actually motivated to move. That's not really enough for me. I want chemo, right? And, you know, independent merchants are now very clearly getting the idea that if they're just selling through Amazon services, they stand a good chance of getting cloned and killed, right? And in a recession, in an uptime during COVID, whatever, those merchants are going to go to great lengths not to cease to exist. Those are the customers and partners I want, right? That's why I picked the section I picked.
And I'm taking probably also, I mean, you just pointed out COVID. I mean, COVID is a game changer for everyone. And obviously, so many industries and so many areas changing, being sped up or crushed. I thought it was quite interesting. You would say, are you a vitamin, painkiller, or simply the camel? So that's quite straightforward, what you want to achieve. Now, I'm a little intrigued about this. I mean, you also said you're on supply chain. Obviously, that's something else. I'm taking, obviously in days like these where everything changes and we have this huge pain, is this maybe like the next big industry people should be focusing on? Like creating more resilient supply chains? Or that's something where you think that's just a small thing popping up currently, that'll be gone in a couple of months' time? Because like I'm hearing, especially in Europe, everyone's talking about resilience, checking supply chains, and then kind of also saying, hey, we're quite scared of building global products. Let's go a little more local again.
I think shortening of supply chains is a fad because of what's going on here. I think there'll be greater redundancy built in, but that redundancy is between China, Vietnam, India, and Indonesia for manufacturing, not, you know, places truly local for, you know, the US and Europe. We're seeing all sorts of things happen. There's a series of, sorry, I'm getting an echo. Can someone mute the studio? I apologize. The groups of merchants that are working hard on this are getting product from wherever they can because their margins are great at the moment. But once people are competing on relatively efficient pricing, not all the manufacturing is going to be automated yet. You're still going to have to go to the cheaper countries to do the building. And people won't be squeezing margin out of it at the level of taking great risks as they had been. But the supply chains are still going to be pretty long. I'm not worried about whether or not container shipping is going to go away or any of these other such things that you hear.
Niket, I saw you were kind of nodding and were you just about to say something about 20 seconds ago?
Just stepping kind of outside of the physical realm, because I agree with Scott's point on supply chain durability and redundancy, right? An old idea is essentially your calorie mile. So in the United States, this is essentially the energy cost it takes to produce 1 calorie of food and how much to move it. And so what you're trying to optimize for is essentially what is the distance you should carry a calorie, because there's an efficiency that you gain through putting it all together and centralizing manufacturing. And then how do you kind of spread it? And so the Americans actually, they centralized and then they ship everything. So California is one of the major producers of food within the country. And then the Russians, on the other hand, they actually basically decentralized. Their idea was survive as much as possible. And to Scott's point, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. And just because you have something like COVID occur doesn't mean that just-in-time manufacturing doesn't make sense. It just means that the margins of how much inventory you kept in line probably should increase rather than being perfectly efficient. Moving to a more digital spectrum, which is kind of realm that I currently sit in, the same thing's kind of occurring, right? It's not like following the sun or having worldwide global teams wasn't well understood or well known, but those are actually becoming not strategic decisions, but baseline modalities. And I'm curious, for instance, like what just OpEx on like travel expenditures for companies and stuff like that, how that's going to remarkably change moving forward. And if that ever actually stabilizes to something that we were on the trajectory to. And again, there's a lot of good reasons that people should be meeting, but we're starting to have different discussions on what we thought was efficiency and what we thought was strategy. The two might be actually flipped. And that's going to be the big question of how companies operate moving forward. You know, I think Stripe built like, they're like our fifth engineering powerhouse is going to be a remote engineering system. That's not them trying to follow a work from home trend. That's actually, I think, a strategic question, which is that their durability as a company, forget about payments now, but their durability as a company is predicated on ideas that'll come out of that. Scott, do you think anything's going to change in that front, like on the manufacturing side, where strategy and efficiency flip?
I do, but I've been trying to have half my team on each side of the world for a while. Right. The last startup I ran, which is a few years ago now, but we would have product management architecture here and implementation in Singapore. Right, which at the time was partially an efficiency thing because we would consistently get an extra half day a week out of every week. But it also gave us insights into modes of consumerism that were from vastly different parts of the world. And you know, it doesn't have to be a place where the cultures are so different necessarily, though that helps as long as communication's all right. But yeah, we all need to be going for global customers sufficiently that if all you've got is a bunch of, you know, high-end university kids in the US sitting within 20 miles of where you and I are right now, that is pointless. You're just not going to get any insight. Right. So it's about heterogeneity as well as backup modes, as well as efficiency.
Now, gents, I have a bit of a different question I'd like to ask. Now, assuming it's not happening, but just assuming we because of a big startup competition going on, and assuming the award would be a meeting with the two of you, and your job is to understand, can we build a global product out of what this startup has? Now, I'm not sure if it's software or hardware. I'm not quite sure what phase they're at. Let's say it's an early stage startup. It's based somewhere in the Central European regions, and you give them both kind of like a couple hours to look deep, do some homework, and question them and rattle their cage to find, is it something we can take global? How would you approach that? What are kind of questions you would look out for? What are things you would double check? What are red flags or things you like seeing in early stage companies? Because we have a lot of very early founders listening in, which we're quite interested to learn how you assess.
Going on the same sort of customer pain thing as earlier, I don't actually think startups can create their own markets. Right, you can find the Bezoses and Zuckerbergs of the world and all those folks, but they're so statistically an aberration that they don't count. For the rest of us, we have to be getting into a business where there's an existing platform that is on the rise, right? Where you can attach yourself to someone else's larger success and surf it like a wave. And so the first thing I ask people is what they're attached to, right? And if they're attached to something that's global and where the host platform will try to kill them later rather than sooner, then that's most of the litmus test for me for going global, right? This supply chain thing that I've been on, you know, it's pretty clear you could ride the Amazon wave, and that they weren't going to do things to enable independent merchants, right? They weren't going to, you know, compete with you on merchant enablement, right, beyond their own store. And in the middle of the process, it also became a Shopify thing for me, right, which required some subtler navigation, because Shopify is happy to enable independent merchants directly as we're talking about. However, they do some things really well and really poorly. And so I just focused on their blind spots, enabling merchants in areas that, you know, they're not going to do, and benefiting their ecology overall from there. right? So it's whose wave are you riding, and have you correctly evaluated their incentives for keeping you alive or killing you?
Mine's similar. I'm almost looking purely at distribution. Great builders over index on their value proposition as a business, and that matters essentially right until you get above some minimum amount that makes your business viable. But after that, most entrepreneurs don't have what I would call holistic go-to-market strategies and distribution mechanics. And people who think through that really well, to Scott's point, will understand what are they riding on, where are they riding it to, and what are the impending things that would happen if they were right. And so just to give you an example, on a technical basis, the first thing is, do entrepreneurs understand whether they're truly building a technology business where there's a technology moat? And if they aren't, then their distribution strategy has to essentially be so excellent so as to make up for that, especially at speed. Because if you're starting in one geography and it's remotely applicable in others, to use this kind of global product building example here, then you're probably just going to get copied. And so now your TAM is heavily reduced, and you might not even have a business depending on where you started. So back when I was in Moldova, you know, a lot of people had asked, like, well, how do I build this like company here in Moldova? And I was like, well, how many people are in this country? There's 11,000 visitors per year. Are you even sure that you could get it off the ground before someone copies your idea in a different, more viable market? And so just that second layer of thinking around distribution right after you have technology and business value proposition is usually under developed. And so I'll be looking for that.
Thank you very much for those insights. And kind of my final question is, and I've been asking this question nearly all speakers today, as we're in interesting times where seemingly a lot is changing and a lot of narratives are changing, and then again, a lot of things that have always been considered the way they are suddenly being broken up. I'd be interested if you, both of you, or one of you each, would have to formulate a moonshot where you think this is something that actually might happen someday in the, you know, a moonshot, and the other would be a prediction. I'd be interested. So prediction, obviously you're quite sure this is going to happen in the near future, and a moonshot, yeah, a bit like Kennedy did in the early 60s. We say, I think at the end of this century, of this decade, we'll have a man on the moon. What's your view? Prediction, a moonshot. Whoever wants to go first can select the weapon of choice. Speed is of the essence, gentlemen.
We will have a person back on the moon this decade, pleasantly. But I don't think that's what you mean.
Not quite.
What's most interesting to me at the level you're talking about is this is going to accelerate renewables over coal, et cetera. I don't know if it's still going on, but as a few days ago, coal was below renewables for 6 weeks running in the US, which is heavily weather dependent. But it was the first time it had happened for more than 10 days straight. Right, and we're going to see, you know, all sorts of ecological improvements there, maybe not enough to save us, but the longer a recession lasts, the fewer internal combustion engine cars get sold, ever. Right, and you know what we're going to do with all those rusting buckets is unclear, but all the electric guys are going to do better and better and better as these purchases are delayed. Right, and that's going to be a tremendous amount of fun, and will probably affect electrical aviation and the other areas.
Thank you. That's a prediction I'm taking.
Implied moonshots here and there.
So Niket, it's up to you then.
My moonshot hope is that we, and this is a bit American biased, but that we can start to develop societies that actually serve the people that are in them. Essentially, a lot of economists, ironically enough, said you can't shut down a consumption-based economy and plan on surviving. We're basically testing, or I should say at least messing around with that right now. And that, I think, should lead to questions about how we've constructed a lot of the way that society has been operating. So it's easy to say we're going to be more remote. We're going to have like more digital connection. Those are kind of more like ancillaries. But the question is, will we change society to actually support the people that are in it? And I very much want to be on the writing side of that after all of this is over. And I don't want to go back to normal. So when people say when things going to go back to normal, I hope the answer is never, because if what we thought was working for us, you shouldn't want to go back. Now there's a stabilization and then there's a rewrite. And I'm hoping Scott and folks like all the people listening in will rewrite something better.
I'm liking that viewpoint. Gentlemen, I'll try and summarize some of what we said because we have exactly 52 seconds left. I'm half German, so I do like being precise as well. And I quite like this view on how to build global products. And as simple as it sounds, we kind of decided quite quickly, or the two of you pointed out, it's about creating empathy for customers. As simple and as hard as that. Then we said, obviously, we need to understand how do we get to them? And first and foremost, we need to understand, do they have some sort of a common pain, something they can feel, something we can feel, and we can create a certain mutual approach to it. It's not about building the best thing, but it's about sucking less than the others, which I think is a very nice way of putting it. You don't have to be good, just suck less than the others. I quite like that. The best way to start trying to find out how much you suck or not is talk about the problem you're trying to solve. Then, of course, we understood it's only relevant if we know that there's a huge market we're addressing. Is there a platform we can actually connect to, which we can ride in? Because, yep, Facebook and co, that's quite cool, but is there something we can leverage and enable on? Of course, we also found out that we are living in quite a blessed time to build. It's a hard time to feel alone because there's so many people we can connect to, and that's a good way in actually finding out, are we doing something that matters? Great question was, whom are you attached to? That's a great question we can also ask founders from now on. Whom are you attached to? What kind of a platform are you attached to? And of course, what we also said early on, which I quite liked, is do we have a shared culture? Do we have some sort of shared beliefs and values together? And I learned when you're building a company, don't try and be some kind of a vitamin. Don't try and be some kind of a painkiller. Be the hammer. Be smack bang in everyone's face. And then you might actually persevere and last it for the long run. It's been quite interesting. We heard there'll be some change. We heard there might be even change for the better. Nonetheless, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, meeting the two of you, even in kind of weird settings. And I really enjoyed the Pink Pirate approach. That was quite different. Yes, Scott, I've been wanting to ask you this because this is kind of a fireside chat, just between two bearded gentlemen. How are you doing with the, I mean, you've got a beard going as well, Niket, but like, no, I don't mean it in a hard way.
Just give me till 5 o'clock today. I'll be right there with you guys.
Good one. But how are you doing with the facial masks thing? I'm struggling with this.
I'm not using surgical mask or whatever. I've just got a sort of a neck gaiter that I pull up.
That helps a lot because
camping equipment I already had.
Okay, good. Because I've tried a couple of masks and beard and masks don't go well at all. So please, if we need innovation,
the whole giant turtleneck thing.
Yes, I'm quite liking that approach. Gentlemen, stay safe. I'm very happy to meet you in person sometime in the near future. Until then, stay safe. Have a good one. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a lovely evening. Thank you all day. Now, we've had quite an interesting day, haven't we? We've spent quite a couple hours together discussing, learning, seeing some things that were working quite well. We've been looking in the future. We've been making quite a lot of moonshots and predictions. And I would like to make one prediction at least, and that is tomorrow is going to be amazing. If you like today, wait for tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to have a lot of topics, including we're going to talk about digital Europe. We're going to be talking about innovation in the agriculture area. We'll be talking blockchain and whatnot. And of course, there's one more prediction I would like to make, and that is, that was my potentially last sentence for today on this beautiful little stage, because I shall be handing over my stage all the way back to Maribor to Yuder. Yuder, how are you doing, my friend?